Welcome back to Storytime with Quefish. This is reading my own story, Effortless Intimacy, Chapter 7. Chapter 7, Sentiments and Stars. Aziraphale was almost unnaturally quiet, considering how excited Crowley knew he was. He had decided to head just out of London to a field away from bright city lights. He tried not to wax nostalgic very often, instead simply being where and when he was, but finding the bread had put him in a mood. He also wasn't sure what it was about the bread. It wasn't as though it had magical properties. Ingredients grown in her brown earth, mixed by human hands, made in her image, baked by fire given to the humans by his angel, actually. Crowley looked over at Aziraphale in curiosity. Did he realize that? That not only had Aziraphale given away his sword to be used to give warmth and protection to Adam and Eve as they set out, and of course it was then used by war, and some very plucky children, but also gave way to the cooking and baking that he indulged in so. Barely paying attention to the road, he kept the Bentley on course to the field he had scouted out earlier in the day. So, where are we heading, my dear? I'm not sure we've ever been this way. I found a nice patch of green, wanted to actually look up and watch the stars for once. He tried to play it off as though it was not an important statement, shrugging. If that's all right, we can head somewhere else. Aziraphale looked at him softly and murmured, Crowley, I go where you go. I would follow you anywhere and let you drive me anywhere. I am honored and touched beyond words that you'd share that with me. He reached out and took Crowley's hand in his, holding it gently. Crowley couldn't help a slight blush from staining his cheeks at having been seen through so easily. He smiled, though, glad to not have to explain himself. Well, that's all right then. They arrived at the meadow and walked out to a patch that was shielded from the road. Aziraphale set out a small blanket as Crowley created a fire. Between the bookshop and the threat in heaven, he still wasn't very comfortable allowing the angel near flames, even small and relatively harmless human ones. For his part, the angel was willing to allow this, and never questioned or argued about it, knowing how much Crowley needed the reassurance. He imagined it was the same as he felt about the holy water, and Crowley had never brought that up again. Thank somebody. Once settled, and the wine open and sufficiently aired, Crowley brought out the bread round and watched Aziraphale's eyes widen and sparkle. Aziraphale had been thinking of the bread during the drive, and having the same sorts of questions as Crowley about why it was so delectable. He watched as Crowley placed the bread close to the fire and slowly turned it, as it had been before, and couldn't think of anything to say. Aziraphale noticed the relaxed turn of Crowley's shoulders, and how there was a small smile gracing his lips. He knew that Crowley wasn't as enamored with food as he was, which meant that smile, all this effort, was all on Aziraphale's behalf. He became a bit dewy-eyed as he watched Crowley, feeling the full weight of the bread's meaning settling on his soul like a gossamer security blanket. Yet he could think of no words to give to the moment. You know, on the way here, I realized that you're responsible for this bread even existing. Crowley spoke softly, and in the quiet his voice was almost musical in the drops and rhythm. Aziraphale tilted his head curiously, but didn't interrupt. That sword. Would humans have figured it out by then? That fire was a tool to create, not just destroy? If it hadn't been handed to them by an angel from heaven, would they have believed they could use it? Then out of nowhere, we meet up and are treated to a meal that had this bread you'd never had before, created using the tool you gave them. And I got to be there. I came back later to find the man, but he was gone. I wanted to be able to experience that moment again. Hopefully impress you. Oi, fancy seeing you again. Oh, hey, remember that bread you liked? Crowley let out a small chuckle, and Aziraphale still kept quiet, enraptured by the story. Yellow eyes came up, meeting blue eyes that had allowed a few tears to escape, and then looked back down with a small smile crinkling the edges. The bread came away from the fire and unwrapped from the linens that the family had sent him with. Aziraphale poured wine and took a small sip before handing the glass to Crowley, holding out his hand for the bread. He scooted closer, seating himself so his hip was next to Crowley's knee, facing the opposite way, looking at him. As the wine glass was set to the side, Crowley reached back out for the bread, but Aziraphale held it. "Please, allow me, my dear." He broke open the bread, and the scent surrounded them. He pulled a piece out and held it in front of the demon's lips. Crowley's hand came out and cupped his face, his thumb wiping the tears off Aziraphale's cheeks. As he moved forward to take the bread into his mouth, his other hand wrapped around the angel's wrist to hold him still. His eyes closed as the morsel slipped past his lips, and he kissed the angel's fingertips before moving back and opening his eyes to look back into the blue eyes he could have written constellations in. "Angel, Crowley swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. Aziraphale leaned forward, whispering Crowley's name as he kissed him tenderly. Pulling back, he began pulling off pieces of bread and feeding Crowley, holding the wine glass for him and softly kissing his lips. The bread was more than halfway gone this way, before Crowley realized that Aziraphale had not been enjoying any himself. And wasn't that the whole point of this? He reached for the bread, however Aziraphale didn't hand it over. "Crowley, please, allow me. I want this, please. You are so precious to me. Angel, I got this for you to enjoy, not to feed me. You think I'm not enjoying this? My demon waiting thousands of years looking for something that I enjoyed. The first time we ate together, you recall with such detail. And now you're looking at me as though it was I who hung the stars instead of yourself. You have no idea how beautiful you are, and how enamored I am by everything you do while thinking of me. I am truly blessed to have you in my life, Crowley." Crowley choked up a bit and tried to find a way to lighten the mood, but nothing was coming to mind. He took the angel's free hand in both of his, bringing it to his lips, kissing the knuckles, then the palm, before resting it on his cheek, suddenly realizing he had been crying. Aziraphale set the bread aside and pulled Crowley towards him onto his lap. He pulled Crowley down gently, licking at his lips before passionately reaching his tongue into Crowley's mouth, seeking satisfaction. The flavor tingled and flooded him, the spices, sweet and bitter, only being enhanced exponentially by the taste that was Crowley. The demon wrapped his arms around the angel, trying to force his appreciation of the words of praise given to him through the embrace. They held each other tightly, each being inundated with the rampant emotions being shared. The sounds of joy, want, and thanks all meshed together, coming from deep in their chests. After a time, the kisses slowed, and Crowley tucked Aziraphale's face into his neck, whispering, "I don't deserve this. I've done nothing in my existence that has earned this." Aziraphale began kissing the demon's throat, feeling the deep sound reverberating through his lips. "My dear Crowley, you deserve it more than anyone I've ever known." Crowley came off of Aziraphale's lap, wiping his face on a handkerchief that suddenly appeared in the angel's hand. He raised an amused eyebrow in his direction and opened his mouth to make a remark when the angel jumped in. "My dear boy, it was in my pocket. You weren't paying attention." He grinned at the demon, who was grateful for the break back into lighter moments. "Now, I promise I'll eat the bread. However, I must ask that you bring it back to the fire first. Then, as I do, please tell me about your stars. You brought me to see them. Tell me about them." Crowley rewrapped the bread carefully as he'd been taught to, and rewarmed the bread. He handed the wineglass to Aziraphale, who took a long sip before handing it back. Once seated, he offered the angel his lap. "Lie down, angel, and I'll tell you anything you want." Aziraphale laid his head in his lap and allowed Crowley to feed him the remainder of the bread while telling him stories about the parts of the heavens he helped create. The end of chapter 7. Thank you very much for joining me. See you for chapter 8.